Hello. In this video, I'm just going to kind of ramble about the theory about what I'm doing. And I know I'm always doing theory videos, but the theory is interesting to me. This was originally going to be a highly edited video drawing on fundamental concepts from other fighting games, but I didn't have the patience to do that, so sorry. And I've decided to lay off Archmage for the time being. If you really need some of that sweet, sweet Archmage content, I recommend you go watch Rofo the Germ's video on it. It's very fun, better than I can do at the moment. I wanted to make this video and extrapolate what I could from these clips before it was too late. Before I had moved into a new cognitive paradigm entirely. I can subtly feel myself sliding into a transitional period between ideas from what I had just done for hours on end every day into something both different and familiar. In truth, I don't know where I'll be at the end of it, be it an Elden Ring or a different From Software title or something else entirely. So in true to form Prin video style, this is going to be half scripted, half commentary, because I only have a few overarching points to make, but there is minutiae I need to point out where I can, in order to definitively give you these clips. It's one thing to watch a video, it is another to have it. And I would very much like you to have it as much as you possibly can. Some would presume that you will have no way of knowing what spells an invasion might Some may presume that you'll have no way of knowing what spells an invasion might call for until you get into the host's world. But excluding numerous buff and utility spells, many situations can be quelled with average spacing and situational awareness, and one or two good set play mix-ups, or even preset sequences. You can create a mental flowchart for which spell to use at which spacing thresholds, usually becoming faster, safer, or larger for close-range targets. Any melee range spell should brush an opponent out of close range and into the gray area of mid-range, where a lot of the fun happens. Putting up glint blades, shard spirals, roiling magma, Rykard's Rancor, whatever is your wish. This particular invasion made me unusually upset. I am one to use Bestial Sling from time to time, or Bestial Sling, however you pronounce it. But to only use that against me is something of an insult. It is an insult to the craft, it is an insult to the fine art, the occult mathematics of Thaumaturgics. So naturally you just have to do the only thing that is appropriate to do in these situations, and it is of course to murder the furled finger, and then brutally assassinate the host using the exact same method that they employed on you, by spamming the exact same spell over and over again, but better. This is not the theory part, this is just me ranting. To be honest, a lot of this is just going to be me saying, you know, Magic Glintblade is just so good. And Magic Glintblade is astonishingly broken, but not for the reasons that other things are broken. Magic Glintblade is an opportunity creator. It is the key to the door of advanced setups. It is the leering eye of darkness which gazes back out from the void and into the soul of the caster. Or something to that effect. And you know, get yourself some freezing pots. It's guaranteed stun because it almost certainly procs every time. It increases your damage on a frostbitten target because frostbite does that. It's just a great consumable throwable item that anyone can have. I think I was first turned on to the idea of the frozen pots when I learned that they could stun Malenia, which just kind of alerted me to their existence, so that's the first part. And then I realized that, you know, frostbite is kind of broken, so to be able to apply that would be useful, and then Book of Matches suggested that in order to overcome Barrier of Gold, you frostbite a target to get the damage up. A whole bunch of things contributed to me using them. And now I am telling you, viewer, to use them. So let's talk about the build itself, because that's actually somewhat important this time around, because I actually did experiment with a couple different variations on the late roll wizard. And by a couple variations, I mean way, way, way too many variations, like splitting hairs of differences in points by like 1 or 2 sometimes, just to really see what it was like to walk around with it and see what it could do. don't sleep on Terra Magicus. It's very useful. I highly recommend having Terra Magica if you're doing mostly magic damage, just to have it. Even if you don't plan on standing around in one place, you might as well have it. There will be opportunities when you can set it up ahead of time, and you won't be punished for it, definitely. And in those situations, you're gonna want to be able to set it up. Terra Magica is an aerial denial spell predicated on the threat of you being able to hit your spells. It is a spell that relies upon you being able to use the rest of your toolkit correctly in order to get any value out of it at all. And, usually this will come down to mashing Slicer or something. But let me tell you something. Phantoms meta, anyone at meta, is doing way too much damage. If you gotta throw Slicer out while you're standing in your Terra Magicus to claim your space and get people off of you, then that's what you have to do. I'm also not really torn up about using things like Star Shower as an invader because, I'm one person. It's basically a spell that chases down for you, and it's different having a host or a phantom spam Star Shower at you while somebody else is chasing you down. It's very different to just be an invader that needs to finish someone off. Or better yet, stop the infinite running away that is possible and attempted many, many, many times. This and Collapsing Stars will shut that shit down like nobody's business. So if you're finding that people are getting away from you a little bit too much, and you need to be able to, stop them from running away infinitely, Star Shower, Collapsing Stars, any long-range spell that moves relatively quickly and has extremely strong homing, definitely something to keep in mind, even if you do not attune it. But let's get back to the build. This is a light roll survivability sorcerer. This specific one is some kind of 80 int variation, and I was testing the Carrion Regal Scepter a little bit. It only has half cast speed, but that's honestly okay. And it's okay because you have light roll, you have 60 vigor, and you have enough endurance to light roll while having relatively decent absorptions. The actual benefit to this build is that it doesn't do enough damage to one-shot people most of the time, so you can actually get some combos and setups off. And I would be lying if I told you anything different, that if I had made this build because I thought it was better than anything else, no. I actually, for once, wanted to deal just a little less damage. And it actually worked out much better than I was anticipating. I was expecting to never be able to kill anyone because of how the damage breakpoints work in these games, but no, sorcery can actually just kind of set people up to die when you use the right spells at the right times. In fact, it is actually entirely possible to go to meta without Slicer and be somewhat successful. I'm not going to pretend like I don't crutch on it a little bit sometimes, because I definitely do, but there are scenarios where you just kind of have to get rid of people because they are being a nuisance and they're ruining your experience. This is my justification for being a shitter sometimes. It's like my final defense. If you have absolutely refused to obey the decorum of my playstyle, then I will just kill you. I'm trying to make this fun for both of us, and you have made it not fun for me, so I will remove you from the equation. And as you're watching these clips, I'm pretty sure you will notice that most of the time, I'm not just rushing people down with Slicer. I am making a strong showing at being wizardly, I think. I would like to think. Anyway, the build is really good, and I would like to let you know that you don't have to invest the full 80 points in int at meta to get your bang for your buck. You actually technically get more value per point of int at 60 than you do at 80 with the Academy Glintstone staff. The difference being that the Azure staff scaling is significantly worse at 60 than it is at 80, relatively. So you're probably just going to want to bump up to 65 to get at least 300 spell buff if you're using the Azure staff. And you can do light roll sorcerer very easily with 65 int, and have plenty of endurance in mind, it's a very easy stat spread to have, and I've tried it. It's very good. It's actually probably a little bit better than half-cast speed, just because of the nature of how frame data works and how these combos and setups function. A spell I've been playing around with a little bit is Magic Downpour. The nice thing about Magic Downpour is that it locks onto the point of the target that you are locked onto, and it will spray in that direction after it's been cast. This does virtually no poise damage or stun whatsoever, but it actually does do a pretty good chunk of damage for each burst of magic rain. The main benefit to this being that it is asynchronous. It operates while you are actionable. And the reason this is important is because the Magic Downpour can be going on for quite a while, and you can be throwing other spells to get people to get hit by it. And when it's all said and done, that's a lot of damage that they're taking at one time. And then when you realize you have a lot of different projectile arcs, you start to realize that you can layer these asynchronous pressure options in such a way that it is more or less impossible to avoid damage without, at the very least, in some way trading. And that is a best-case scenario. Absolute worst-case scenario is you get hit, you freak out, and you back off, and then you get sucked back into the vortex of spell pressure. This is, all in all, not foolproof, and it takes somebody with at least, like, a bit of knowledge of projectile arcs in FromSoft games to avoid them, and most of the time this comes down to just strafing by running in a perpendicular angle to the direction that you are casting. But we have defenses for perpendicular running in Star Shower, which I'm pretty sure is the axis it's supposed to cover. Star Shower is like the knight in chess. It hits in front of and slightly to the sides of you. That's where it's supposed to land. And that's where it threatens. So when people get hit by it, they usually try to get further away from you to get out of its range, but that's actually the worst thing to do because moving away from Star Shower actually makes you get hit by more of the projectiles, so don't actually do that. The actual way to beat Star Shower is to just roll into it. Roll directly forward, take some of the hits, and then just, like, absolutely wail on the mage as hard as you possibly can. If the mage is running, they are not casting. If they stop to cast, chances are you're gonna hit them. I'm telling you this because any sorcerer worth their salt is going to avoid this situation at all costs. Because once you are next to them, they will have to resort to Slicer, and Slicer does not do very good poise damage. Which brings me to the elephant in the room, poise. Poise is an issue, yes, but it's less of an issue than you might think on its own, especially for a sorcerer. And this is because what you are doing are not technically combos in the traditional sense of hit, stun, and frame advantage, but setups and burst damage. The only time poise is something to be truly and honestly concerned about on a light roll sorcerer like this is when somebody has poise and Barrier of Gold. Because your win condition of burst damage has evaporated before your eyes. Now there are some defenses to Barrier of Gold. There's obviously having Terra Magica up and using a frozen pot. That will at least bring your balance of damage back into line a little bit, but you were already kind of relying on having the extra damage of one of those buffs in the first place. The second is, of course, you can wait it out, and that's not exactly fun, or interactive, or engaging, and I don't have the patience to do that, so I'm not going to. You can waste a whole spell slot, which is something I've done, and you can attune Law of Aggression, and you can just peel it off whenever they put it on, but this often devolves into a war of buffing and unbuffing people. Also, it strips you of any of your buffs you might have, so that kind of sucks. I really don't have a good solution to it other than use your environment. The one benefit that you have is that you can keep distance and still threaten. A sorcerer has more potential to take advantage of things like cliffs, things like enemy placement, things like walls, more than most other builds. And that's because you're dangerous not just in front of you, but also way in front of you. So when in doubt, take a look around and see if there's not something in your immediate environment that you can use to overcome Barrier of Gold. Something like Gavel of Haima is especially useful. It's crowd control, hyper armor, and guaranteed poise break, so at least you will be able to stun people in the event that they really feel the need to put on Barrier of Gold. Now, I know I've just gushed about Magic Glintblade not too long ago, but Magic Glintblade has a twin, and it's a faster twin. It is Great Glintstone Shard. Great Glintstone Shard is also not so secretly an extremely good spell. It's as good and actually probably significantly better than Great Soul Arrow ever was in any of the other Souls games. I've resorted to calling it the swipe right because you cast it when you want people to come closer to you. Also, when you have a staff in your right hand, you swipe from left to right, so. And then Slicer is obviously the swipe left because you want people to leave you alone. And Carrion Slicer in the right hand swipes right to left, so it only makes sense. What I'm trying to say is that Thaumaturgics are really just Tinder. I'm not going to elaborate. The one thing that's particularly fascinating is just how far away people stay from you, even in this huge open space. It's actually kind of funny because open spaces usually suck for invaders, but in this particular scenario, you can actually make really good use of it because there's nothing to block any of your spells. Great Glintstone Shard is especially useful in a little two-piece setup I do, which is just Great Glintstone Shard into Magic Glintblade. It sounds incredibly basic, I know, but bear with me. You cast the Great Glintstone Shard to get them to roll or react, and then you use that reaction time to immediately cast a Magic Glintblade, which, if they reacted just slowly enough, should be safe. You are only going to get punished for this if they point-blank strafe the Great Glintstone Shard and immediately running attack you. It is almost impossible to punish any other way. The other two responses are to roll out of the way, which gives you time to put up the Magic Glintblade and be actionable, or they attempt to run at you directly, in which you can actually use Great Glintstone Shard like a melee range option. And I will tell you why. First, it does 55 poise damage, so it takes 2 of them to break most players' poise. This is more than Slicer. The second is that, unlike Great Soul Arrow in the Dark Souls series, which is cast from above your head, Great Glintstone Shard is cast at chest level. This means that it's far less likely to go over the head of anyone running at you and can actually be used to halt an approach. This doesn't sound that crazy, but it's actually really, really good. Not to mention it does a fantastic chunk of damage on its own, something that is definitely not worth ignoring. And once someone takes one of them, they're very unlikely to want to take another. The second meta sorcerer variation I'm showing off is a pretty run-of-the-mill Celia assassin kind of setup. I alternated between double Staff of Loss and Azure Staff with the Staff of Loss, and I couldn't really say which one I liked better. I did like the mobility and utility that came with the Azure Staff being as fast as it is, but the cost was a little high on things, because even multiplying the Night Sorceries by 1.2 times their initial cost does make it a little prohibitive. And I did like the sniping power of the double Staff of Loss, in that it very readily erased opponents you needed gone, but it did feel a little bit hit or miss. I guess Feast or Famine was better. Basically, there's no good way to set up the big burst of Night Comet that I'm aware of at the range that it is most effective. Once again, you could use it like a melee range option, but it's not quite as fast as Great Glintstone Shard. And although you can chain cast it, it does drain your FP bar very, very quickly, even without the Azure Staff. You do get absolutely ridiculous chip damage on Night Shard, which is absolutely nothing to ignore. But there really is nothing more boring and more one-sided than a sorcerer who will only plink you with Night Shard, or Swift Glintstone Shard for that matter. Once again, I'm looking to play the game here, to some extent. I know it's very, very easy to optimize the fun out of things, but I would like there to be at least the illusion of interplay, the facade of interactivity. Sometimes a good build can be a series of minigames that you and your opponent play together. And there's no harm in stacking it a little in your favor. The Knight Sorcerer is more of a stealth assassination playstyle. You're not really worried about the combat so much as you are worried about the one kill you'll be getting. And because Knight Sorceries are pretty much impossible to stop and can pierce multiple targets, you can effectively bypass the phantoms entirely and kill the host in the right situations. So I carry things like Magic Glint Blades, Shard Spiral to get them to roll so that I could punish with the Night Comet. But as I've said, it airs a little bit too close on the side of deleting people, so I've retired it for the time being. The real thing this build taught me was that Unseen Form is a very effective form of defense, even if it's not a very effective form of stealth. And this is because beyond like 10 feet or something away from you, you can't be locked onto. And you're also pretty hard to spot at a distance. That in conjunction with the Furled Fingers Trick Mirror, Assassin's Gambit, or the Obscuring Talisman will make you pretty much impossible to detect at the ranges that you are actually effective. So even if you aren't looking to one-shot, definitely consider Unseen Form, even on builds that have relatively low int compared to a meta sorcerer, because it is a good form of damage mitigation, especially against enemy sorcerers and snipers. I pretty much took off all of the spells that I didn't think would fit in an assassin's toolkit, and I left the rest, and then I kept things as necessary. And I'm glad I did, because it enabled this little setup here, which is Glintblade Piercer, which is not a true combo, mind you, but it is very difficult to avoid unless you just roll away. Also with the Azir Staff, it might be relatively close to true as a combo. There's a little bit too much you can do with double Glintblade, so if you have the opportunity to cast it twice, and you often can because it is a chain cast, I recommend going for it. Even if you take a hit on the second Glintblade, because the advantage you gain from it is so great that you will be able to defend yourself. Another good thing to do is that if you are being pursued by two targets, lock onto one, cast a Glintblade, and then pivot your lock onto the next target and cast the second Glintblade, which makes it so that you have a couple of seconds of threat, which will deter an offensive approach and let you set up even more things. You can set up more Glintblades, you can set up a Terra Magica, you could throw a Night Maiden's Mist, you could put on your Carrion Phalanx, you can do quite literally whatever you want with that free action economy that you gain from that pressure. Also, notice how Magic Downpour does next to nothing for me here, because it's not the same type of tool as Magic Glintblade. Magic Downpour is really quite terrible for pressure, but very good in conjunction with pressure you have already set up. And look just how far Light Roll gets you away from people. It puts them right back into your optimal casting range. That's the real draw to Light Roll, that for a sorcerer, it always puts you right at the sweet spot to where you want to be casting from. I should mention that the Night Sorcery Assassin build was not a light roll. That was a medium roll. I wasn't really anticipating on getting up close all that much, if I could possibly avoid it, but the fact of the matter was that Night Comet did actually work as a melee range option, because it was just that good. Also, look at how nifty it is that you can, like, cast through these windows. A little something if you ever get stuck in an invasion here, which I have a couple of times, so I have a feeling that other people will as well. And I managed to lock them in with Night Maiden's Mist and then put the Night Maiden's Mist right in the center, and then just finish them off with the Night Sorceries. It really doesn't get any more simple than that. And a friendly reminder that if I see you holding the Fingerprint Shield, I will not be holding back anything at all. You do not deserve mercy, grace, or kindness holding that thing. I was going to go into extensive detail about spell order, but I don't feel that it's entirely necessary. I think it's a person-by-person thing. I don't think there's any optimal way to arrange your spells other than to have the ones that you use the most up front and the ones that you use the least in the back. Now, if you have a particular setup that you're using, for me it's Great Glintstone Shard into Magic Glintblade, then yeah, you're going to want to have those next to each other. In Demon Souls, you always put Fireball before Ignite because you can combo Fireball into Ignite and you don't want to have to keep flipping through all of your spells, especially when you can't just go back to the first one by holding up. Like we found with Tibia's summons, Ambush Shard is an excellent long-range poke. It does actually quite good damage. It doesn't get boosted by the Staff of Loss because it's not technically a night sorcery, but it does what it does well enough. And since you're already investing in stealth a little bit, you might as well have it there. They're not going to know where it's coming from, but they are going to know that they're taking damage, which will unsettle them, which will make them move somewhere else. You are forcing an option by threatening a space. You don't even have to threaten that space particularly well. You don't even have to hit them sometimes. You just have to make them aware that they are in danger. And the nice thing about Ambush Shard is that it doesn't reveal your position, because it doesn't leave a huge trail pointing directly at you, like 99% of the sorceries. Here's an invasion where I found myself in an open field against 2 players, and I didn't entirely feel like taking on Bullgoat's guy here, and another player spamming spells at me entirely on my own, and I did know that there were these land octopi behind me that I could use as a distraction. And they ended up being a lot more than a distraction, so, you know, keep an eye on your environment. Something is bound to be nearby, unless you're in a completely dead level. Now, you might have to run a little bit to get to that, but if they're chasing you, and you know that it's there, and they are relentlessly pursuing, then it's just a matter of time before you get to that safer space. Unless, of course, they've got Star Shower, in which case you'd better run really, really far, really, really fast. So this went on a little bit longer than I intended it to, but I hope that it was enjoyable and informative and perhaps entertaining. Honestly, couldn't tell you what's coming next. It's anyone's guess, so I'm going to leave you with these last 2 clips. And I leave you with these words. Happy casting.